What if the first written law wasn't an eye for an eye? For centuries, we believed Hammurabi's brutal code was the dawn of justice. But a discovery in 1952 revealed a legal system 300 years older, one that preferred a bag of silver over bloody revenge. The story of this code doesn't just change our timeline, it changes our entire understanding of justice. Before courtrooms, before judges, before police, there was this: a clay tablet. For thousands of years, justice was just the whim of a powerful leader. What the king said, went. If you were wronged, your only option was personal vengeance. But around 4,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, humanity had a revolutionary idea. What if we wrote the rules down? This single act, the externalization of justice, changed everything. It meant that for the first time, law wasn't just in a king's head, it was a permanent, public system. It was the birth of the rule of law. We all know the Code of Hammurabi, an eye for an eye. But today, we are looking at a code 300 years older, one that challenges our ideas of progress. This is the story of the Code of Ur-Nammu, the first case study in recorded justice. For millennia, this is where the story of law began. The Code of Hammurabi, king of Babylon. Etched in stone nearly 4,000 years ago, it is the emblem of ancient justice. And at its heart, a principle so visceral, so unyielding, it has echoed down through all of human history: lex talionis. The law of retaliation. If a man put out the eye of another man, his eye shall be put out. If he break another man's bone, his bone shall be broken. An eye for an eye. A tooth for a tooth. For centuries, we have looked to this stele as the genesis of civilization's great attempt to conquer chaos. It was seen as the first, brutal step away from blood feuds and private vengeance, replacing them with the cold, impartial, and absolute power of the state. This, we were told, was the dawn of justice. A harsh and unforgiving dawn, but a dawn nonetheless. It was the moment humanity began to write down the rules, carving a social contract into the very rock of the earth. But what if that story is wrong? What if the first impulse of recorded law was not revenge, but repair? What if our oldest known attempt at justice was not built on the principle of mutual destruction, but on the concept of compensation? This is not a story of a towering monument, but of humble, fragmented clay. It takes us 3 centuries before Hammurabi, to the very cradle of civilization, to the Sumerian city of Ur. And to a discovery, in 1952, that fundamentally reset our understanding of legal history. In the ruins of the ancient city of Nippur, the scholar Samuel Noah Kramer, piecing together fragments from a museum drawer, unearthed something extraordinary. Not a code of vengeance, but a code of value. This is the Code of Ur-Nammu, the oldest surviving law code known to humanity. And its contents are revolutionary. Hammurabi, in the 18th century BCE, declared, "If a man knock out the teeth of his equal, his teeth shall be knocked out." Ur-Nammu, in the 21st century BCE, declared, "If a man, in the course of a scuffle, smash the limb of another man with a club, he shall pay 1 mina of silver." The difference is profound. Where Hammurabi's law demands retribution, Ur-Nammu's law demands restitution. Let us consider what this means. Hammurabi's justice is a visceral, symmetrical, and deeply personal act of state-sanctioned revenge. It is a justice that is performative. It makes justice visible in the land, as Hammurabi himself wrote. It is a stark warning. But it is also a limited one. Blinding the offender does not restore the victim's sight. Breaking his bone does not mend the victim's limb. It simply creates 2 broken men, in the name of balance. The Code of Ur-Nammu, 300 years earlier, operates on a different, and arguably more sophisticated, philosophy. If a man knocked out the eye of another man, he shall weigh out 1/2 mina of silver. This is not a failure of justice. It is a different definition of it. It is a system that recognizes the injury, not as a cosmic scale to be balanced with more pain, but as a debt to be paid. It is a justice rooted in a form of empathy, a practical acknowledgement that the victim has suffered a tangible loss. That half mina of silver could pay for care. It could support the victim's family, now that their ability to work might be compromised. It sought to make the victim whole, not by dragging the offender down, but by lifting the victim up. This single, staggering contrast forces us to re-evaluate our entire narrative of human progress. We have so often assumed that law is a linear journey, a slow, steady march from savage brutality toward enlightened mercy. But the Code of Ur-Nammu suggests something far more complex. It suggests that the oldest laws we can read today were not born from the sword, but from the scales. That our first written rules were about societal repair, not just state-sponsored revenge. And it presents us with a chilling puzzle. If the more compassionate, compensatory system came first, why did the brutal lex talionis of Hammurabi replace it? Why did the law, in this instance, appear to go backward? This is not just a quest for the first case. It is a journey into the very soul of human governance, a search for the moment we first tried to define what it means to be just. And the answers, hidden in this broken clay, are more challenging, and more relevant, than we could ever imagine. To understand this revolution in justice, we must first understand the revolution in technology that made it possible. Before a law could be codified, it had to be written. Before a verdict could be permanent, it had to be recorded. This entire history, every code, every contract, every king's decree, exists only because of a technological leap that happened here, in the fertile crescent of Mesopotamia, in the land of Sumer. For millennia, human society was governed by two forces: immediate, personal power, and fragile, fading memory. A king's decree was only as powerful as the last person who heard it. A custom was only as strong as the eldest elder who remembered it. Justice was subjective. Law was ephemeral. It existed only in the air, in the breath of the speaker, and then it was gone. In a dispute, there was no independent truth to appeal to. There was only one man's word against another, and the whim of the chieftain who judged them. How do you build a city, let alone an empire, on a whisper? The solution emerged not from kings or priests, but from merchants and accountants. Around 3500 BCE, the Sumerians, needing a way to manage their complex economy, to track bushels of grain, heads of livestock, and jars of oil, invented a system. We call it cuneiform, from the Latin cuneus, meaning wedge. It was a system of abstract symbols, not drawn, but impressed into wet clay using a cut reed stylus. This was the world's first true writing system. And the medium the Sumerians chose was as revolutionary as the script itself. Not delicate papyrus, which rots in the damp. Not parchment, which burns to ash. But simple, abundant, Mesopotamian clay. Once a record was inscribed, the tablet was left to bake in the hot sun or fired in a kiln. The message, a transaction, a rule, could now outlive the person who wrote it. It could outlive the king who decreed it. It could, as we have seen, survive for 40 centuries, buried in the dust. This remarkable durability is the primary reason our earliest and most detailed window into human civilization opens onto Mesopotamia. Their records endured. At first, this new technology was used for administration, counting taxes, recording rations. But its application to matters of law was the true revolution in human governance. This was a monumental cognitive shift. It was the birth of what we call the externalization of justice. Before the clay tablet, justice was a private, internal, top-down command. It was what the ruler decided in that specific moment. It was secret, locked within the king's mind until the moment it was spoken. It could be arbitrary, inconsistent, and dangerously unpredictable. It took the law out of the fleeting mind of the king and gave it a permanent, public, physical existence. A written law could be copied. It could be carried by a messenger to the farthest corners of the empire. It could be stored, creating a public memory. It could be studied by scribes. And most importantly, it could be cited. For the first time in human history, a citizen, a governor, or even a future king could point to the tablet and say, "This is the law." It created a public standard. A standard against which the actions of all citizens, and even the decisions of the judges themselves, could be measured. This is the conceptual bedrock of the rule of law, the idea that the system itself, not just the ruler, holds authority. This is the world that Ur-Nammu, founder of the third dynasty of Ur, inherited. A world where, thanks to a reed stylus and a block of clay, a king could do more than just rule. He could, for the first time, truly govern. And he would use this power to create history. This shift, from a spoken word to an inscribed object, was more than just a new way of storing information. It was a profound change in the very concept of power. It was the externalization of justice. Let us truly consider what this meant for a citizen of an ancient city like Ur. Before this moment, justice was a mystery. It was a private, internal command, locked inside the mind of a king or a local governor. If this powerful man seized your land, what was your recourse? You could appeal to a judge, but that judge's decision would, itself, be based on his own internal understanding, his memory of custom, his personal biases, perhaps even his relationship with your opponent. Justice was a black box. A plea went in, a verdict came out. The logic in between was invisible, changeable, and deeply personal. For the weak, for the poor, for the orphan, and the widow, as the texts would later say, this system was terrifying. It offered no predictability, and therefore, no real protection. The written law changed this relationship forever. By writing a rule on a tablet, a man may not seize another's land without payment. For example, the law was externalized. It was pulled from the private mind of the ruler and placed into the public world as a physical object. For the first time, justice had a memory. It had a body. This object could be referenced. It could be copied. It could be read aloud. And this simple fact created two revolutionary new concepts: transparency and accountability. The citizen now had a fixed point of reference. He could, in theory, go to the archive, consult the law, and know his rights before he ever entered the courtroom. He could hold the judge himself accountable, not to a personal whim, but to a public standard. And the judge, in turn, was no longer just a vessel of the king's power. He was an interpreter of a public text. His decisions could be measured against that text. This was the birth of a system, a judiciary, that was separate from the mere will of the ruler. This is the true meaning of the rule of law. It is not just about having rules, but about those rules existing in a stable, public, and external form, accessible to all. It establishes a standard that is independent of any one person's power. This cognitive leap, from personal command to public system, is the absolute foundation of all complex society. It is the bedrock upon which every courtroom, every parliament, and every constitution would eventually be built. And the first man we know of who took this technology and used it to proclaim a single, unified system of justice for his entire empire, was a Sumerian king named Ur-Nammu. For decades, the story of law was settled. Hammurabi was the beginning. His code was the alpha, the fountainhead of justice, as one historian called it. The textbooks were written, the museum plaques were engraved. But history is a living document, constantly revised by new discovery. And the revision to this story came not from a dramatic excavation, but from the patient, quiet work of a scholar in a museum. The year was 1952. The scholar was Samuel Noah Kramer, one of the world's foremost Sumerologists. He was working in the archives of the University Museum in Philadelphia, examining tablets excavated decades earlier from the ruins of the ancient Sumerian city of Nippur. He was piecing together fragments of a tablet that had been catalogued as a simple, school text. It was damaged, incomplete, and unassuming. But as Kramer painstakingly translated the cuneiform, he realized he was not reading a student's exercise. He was reading a prologue that spoke of a king, chosen by the gods, to establish equity in the land, and to eliminate enmity, violence, and cries for justice. And then came the laws. If a man committed a robbery, he is to be killed. If a man knocked out the eye of another man, he shall weigh out 1/2 mina of silver. Kramer recognized the form instantly. It was a casuistic law code, a series of if, then pronouncements. But this was not Hammurabi's code. The language was older. The laws themselves were different, focused on the shocking principle of monetary compensation, not an eye for an eye. He was looking at a legal tradition that was far more ancient. This tablet was attributed to Ur-Nammu, the founder of the powerful third dynasty of Ur, a great builder and unifier of Mesopotamia. It dated to roughly 2100 BCE, 300 full centuries before Hammurabi ever ruled in Babylon. The discovery was a seismic shock to the field of history. The first chapter of law had been a prequel. This small, broken piece of clay, rescued from a museum drawer, toppled the mighty stele of Hammurabi from its pedestal as the origin of written law. Now, to be precise, historical references do suggest that even earlier law codes, like that of Urukagina of Lagash, once existed. Ancient scribes wrote about them. But the laws of Ur-Nammu are the oldest that have survived the ravages of time. They are the earliest legal text that we, today, can read with our own eyes. This tablet is not just a historical curiosity. It is the physical, tangible origin of our species' 4,000-year-long attempt to build a just society. It is the first draft. And its contents would force us to ask a profound question. What was this king trying to build? So, who was this king, Ur-Nammu? He was not a minor chieftain. He was the founder of the powerful third dynasty of Ur, a renaissance of Sumerian culture and power. He was an emperor, a unifier, a visionary statesman, and the builder of this very ziggurat, one of the ancient world's most iconic monuments. He presided over a complex, sophisticated, bureaucratic empire. And an empire, he knew, could not be held together by brute force alone. It needed a common purpose. It needed a justification. Like nearly all foundational legal texts, the Code of Ur-Nammu does not begin with Article 1, Section 1. It begins, as it must, with a story. This prologue is the soul of the document. It is the why. It frames the laws that follow not as the arbitrary, self-serving inventions of a mortal king, but as the fulfillment of a divine and sacred destiny. It is, first and foremost, a document of legitimacy. The text is explicit. It declares that the kingship of Ur was delivered by the high gods, and Enlil, to the patron deity of the city, the moon god, Nanna. Nanna, in turn, chose Ur-Nammu to act as his regent on earth. This is a critical political and theological statement. Ur-Nammu is not a tyrant who seized power for himself. He is a shepherd, chosen by the gods to tend their flock. The laws he is about to and what, precisely, was this divine mandate. The prologue states the king's purpose was to establish equity in the land, to eliminate enmity, violence, and cries for justice. This phrase, cries for justice, is haunting. It implies a pre-existing state of suffering. It paints a picture of a land where the weak were voiceless, where injustice was so common that the people were crying out for relief. And then, the code gives us the most powerful, and perhaps the most timeless, expression of this mission. The king, acting as the agent of the gods, must ensure that the orphan did not fall prey to the rich, that the widow did not fall prey to the mighty, that the man of 1 shekel did not fall prey to the man of 1 mina. Let us be clear. In the ancient world, the orphan and the widow were not just terms of sympathy. They were categories of profound vulnerability. To be an orphan was to be without a father, the family's head and legal representative. To be a widow was to be without a husband, the family's economic engine and protector. These were people with no power, no advocate, and no legal standing. They were, in the most literal sense, prey. Ur-Nammu's code, therefore, establishes its moral foundation before delivering a single judgment. It declares that the primary function of law, the very purpose of this new, externalized system of justice, is to be a shield. It is to use the organized power of the state to protect those who have no power of their own from those who have too much. This is the philosophy that breathes life into the administrative rules that follow. It is the standard against which the king himself, and his entire judiciary, have asked to be judged. So, with this divine mission as its moral compass, to protect the weak from the mighty, what did this first draft of justice actually look like? How did it work? The laws themselves, or at least the fragments that have survived these 4,000 years, are arranged in a casuistic format. This is a structure of conditional statements. If a person does X, then Y is the consequence. This simple, practical, if, then, structure would become the standard pattern for nearly all subsequent Mesopotamian law codes, including Hammurabi's. It is a system rooted in specific, real-world examples rather than abstract, high-level principles. And let us be clear, this was not a soft code. Ur-Nammu's state was not permissive. It reserved the ultimate penalty for what it considered the most severe disruptions to social order. The surviving laws are explicit. If a man commits a murder, that man is to be killed. If a man commits a robbery, he is to be killed. The code also prescribed death for the rape of another man's virgin wife, and for adultery by a married woman. These capital offenses reveal the profound interest of the state in maintaining order, protecting private property, and, critically, regulating the institution of marriage and the clear line of inheritance. These were the foundations of their society, and an attack on them was an attack on the state itself. But it is where the code diverges from these capital crimes that its true genius, its revolutionary heart, is revealed. For a vast array of lesser offenses, particularly those involving physical injury, Ur-Nammu's code rejects brutal, physical retaliation. It chooses, instead, a different path: monetary compensation. This is the single most important feature of the code. It stands in stark, staggering contrast to the principle of lex talionis, the law of retaliation, that the Code of Hammurabi would make famous 3 centuries later. Let us compare them directly. Under Hammurabi's later code, the penalty for putting out a man's eye was simple and visceral: his eye shall be put out. Under Ur-Nammu's older code, if a man knocked out the eye of another man, he shall weigh out 1/2 a mina of silver. Under Hammurabi, if he break another man's bone, his bone shall be broken. Under Ur-Nammu, if a man, in the course of a scuffle, smashed the limb of another man with a club, he shall weigh out 1 mina of silver. The list goes on. If he cut off a man's foot, 10 shekels of silver. If he knocked out a man's tooth, 2 shekels of silver. The implications of this are profound. This is not justice as vengeance. This is justice as restitution. It is, arguably, a far more abstract and sophisticated legal philosophy. Ur-Nammu's system treats the injury not as a personal vendetta, a cosmic scale that must be balanced with more pain. It treats the injury as a societal debt that must be repaid through a standardized economic system. Think of the practical difference. Hammurabi's law, in its brutal symmetry, creates 2 blind men, or 2 men with broken limbs, and calls this justice. It satisfies a primitive urge for retribution, but it does nothing to help the victim. Ur-Nammu's law, by imposing a heavy fine, provides the victim with the means to actually recover. That 1/2 mina of silver, a substantial sum, could pay for medical care. It could support the victim's family while he was unable to work. It was a system that aimed to make the victim whole again, at least in an economic sense, rather than simply dragging the offender down. This system also acts as a powerful circuit breaker. It stops the cycle of retribution. Instead of a victim's family feeling compelled by honor to seek their own revenge against the offender, creating a blood feud that could destabilize the community, the state intervenes. It assesses the damage, it extracts the payment, and it satisfies the claim. The debt is paid. The matter is closed. This is a system designed to promote social cohesion, not just to perform state power. This preference for fines over mutilation is not a primitive first step in law. It is an advanced legal concept. And its existence in the 21st century BCE is the central, challenging puzzle of legal history. But Ur-Nammu's code was not just a list of penalties. It also had to provide a mechanism for justice. It had to create a procedure for handling accusations and determining guilt or innocence, especially in cases where there was no clear evidence. What do you do when the crime is not a visible, physical assault, but a matter of a hidden act, like sorcery? Or a private one, like adultery? How does the court prove what no one saw? For these kinds of unprovable, high-stakes accusations, the Code of Ur-Nammu turned to a procedure that seems alien and terrifying to the modern mind: the trial by River Ordeal. This was not a trial by jury or evidence. It was, in essence, a direct appeal to the gods. The river itself, a divine and powerful force in Mesopotamian life, was called upon to act as the ultimate judge. The law was specific. If a man accused another of sorcery, the accused was to be taken to the river. The accused was thrown into the water. The logic was simple: the holy river would accept the guilty, pulling them under to the death. But it would reject the innocent, allowing them to float. If the river proved him innocent, the code states, meaning, if he did not sink, the innocent man was vindicated by the god of the river. But the code did not stop there. And this next clause is what reveals a true, systemic legal mind at work. If the accused was proven innocent by the ordeal, his accuser was required to pay a hefty fine, 3 shekels of silver. This is a profound legal concept. It is one of the world's first known protections against false or malicious prosecution. It establishes that the accuser is not just a concerned citizen. They're an active participant in the legal system and bear a responsibility for their words. It forces a person to think twice before leveling a life-threatening accusation. It recognizes that a false claim is, itself, a crime, an offense against both the innocent party and the state's legal system. This same principle was applied to a wife accused of adultery by her husband. If she, too, was vindicated by the river ordeal, the code specified that her accuser, in this case, her own husband, had to pay 1/3 of a mina of silver. This procedure, while rooted in a supernatural worldview, served a critical social and legal function. It provided a definitive, final, and divinely sanctioned way to resolve, he said, she said, disputes that threatened to tear the community apart. It took the burden of truth out of the hands of fallible humans and placed it, as they saw it, into the hands of the divine. And in doing so, it created a system, albeit a terrifying one, for establishing facts, clearing a name, and, most remarkably, punishing those who would try to use the law as a weapon. Answer: we arrive at the great paradox. The central mystery in the history of law. For centuries, we believed this monument was the beginning. Now we know it was a later chapter. We have seen that 300 years before Hammurabi carved an eye for an eye into stone, the Sumerian king Ur-Nammu had already established a sophisticated system of justice based on compensation. This shatters our comfortable, linear narrative of human progress. We want to believe that law is a one-way street, a steady march away from brutality and toward enlightenment. But the evidence shows the exact opposite. It shows a legal system that, at least on the surface, appears to have moved from monetary fines to mutilation, from restitution to retribution. Why? Why did Hammurabi's later, more brutal code replace the more modern and compensatory system of his predecessors? The answer, it seems, has less to do with the philosophy of justice, and everything to do with the politics of power. This was almost certainly not a regression. It was a deliberate, calculated, and brilliant ideological choice. Ur-Nammu was rebuilding a Sumerian homeland. Hammurabi, by contrast, was a conqueror. He was forging a vast, new, and culturally diverse empire from a collection of warring city-states. He needed to unify them, to stamp his authority onto a fractious population, to impose a single, unchallengeable Babylonian order. To do this, he needed more than a system of fines. He needed a spectacle. Let us look at Hammurabi's own words in his prologue. His stated goal was to make justice visible in the land, and to destroy the wicked person and the evil doer. Compare the two philosophies. Ur-Nammu's fine of 1 mina of silver is an abstract, bureaucratic concept. It is a quiet, economic transaction. It is effective for restoring social balance, but it is not visible. It lacks emotional punch. Hammurabi's an eye for an eye is the opposite. It is visceral, immediate, and unforgettable. It is a justice that is not just done, but is seen to be done. It is a terrifyingly simple equation of pain. You hurt, you get hurt. This is a far more powerful tool of political propaganda. This stele was not a dusty legal text for scribes. It was a monument, erected in the public square for all to see. It was an instrument of social control. For a conquered population, a complex system of fines might imply that justice is negotiable, that the wealthy can simply buy their way out of an offense. But lex talionis is absolute. It is a stark, public demonstration of the king's power. It sends an unchallengeable message to every citizen. The king's justice is symmetrical, it is swift, and it is as brutal as your crime. The state's power reaches down to your very body, your eye, your tooth, your bone. Hammurabi may have prioritized the performative and deterrent aspects of law over the compensatory principles of his predecessors. He did not choose a less advanced form of justice, he chose a more visible one. He chose a form of justice that was more brutal, yes, but also more effective at demonstrating his absolute, newly won power to a sprawling and restive empire. And so, we are left with a more complex, and perhaps more challenging, history of justice. The story of law is not, as we once believed, a simple, linear climb from savage brutality to modern enlightenment. It is not a straight line. Instead, it is a dynamic, human story. It is a mirror, reflecting the shifting needs, the political ideologies, and the human frailties of the societies that create it. The Code of Ur-Nammu, emerging from the 21st century BCE, shows us a legal mind focused on social cohesion. It is a system built on restitution, on repairing the harm done, on making the victim whole. It is a justice designed to stop the cycle of vengeance and preserve the intricate web of the community. It is a justice of compensation. The Code of Hammurabi, 300 years later, shows us a different priority. It is the brilliant, brutal innovation of a conqueror, a unifier of a new empire. It is a justice designed to be seen. It is a tool of state power, a performative and terrifying warning. It is a justice of retribution. The quest for the first case does not lead us to a simple verdict. It leads us to a fundamental choice, a choice that every society, in every era, must make. Is the purpose of law to punish the offender, or to restore the victim? Is it a sword, meant to demonstrate power? Or is it a shield, meant to protect the vulnerable? 4,000 years ago, in the very cradle of civilization, the first kings to write down their laws had already identified this essential conflict. And the fact that we are still, to this day, grappling with that very same question, reveals that their story is, and has always been, our own.